Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Michael Weiss, and I'm a board member of ISTAT, and I'll be hosting this ISTAT Chat. ISTAT Chats and ISTAT Learning Labs are part of ISTAT's new online offerings. We're very excited about these offerings, and we hope that these initiatives will continue to provide members with alternative platforms to networking and learning beyond the traditional in-person type of conference, which clearly is very difficult to organize at present. We tried to design these ISTAT chats to be slightly different to other online offerings. We want these chats to showcase the quality, depth, knowledge, and experience of our membership. And the format really is a fireside chat between two people in the industry, where people can get a behind-the-scenes look and understanding of the individuals, what makes them tick, experiences, history, etc. So without further ado, today's chat is between myself and Neil Cloughley. Neil is Managing Director of Faradair Aerospace Limited, an earlier champion of the hybrid electric flight model within the new air mobility sector, and was founded in 2014. Neil has spoken at many conferences developing the BHAR M1H aircraft. The aircraft could transform regional and non-civilian flight. Neil is a former ISTAT member, regular, and is well known within the industry. And he's a serial entrepreneur with over 15 years experience in the commercial aviation sector, working with some of the largest aviation brands. Faradair has presented to and gained support from various cabinet ministers in the UK government, and he's also advised on future flight policy. The BHAR is due to fly, hopefully, from their new base, which is at Duxford Airfield here in the UK, just northeastish of London. For people who don't know me, again, my name is Michael Weiss. Until very recently, I was head of aircraft trading at SMBC Aviation Capital, and I wasn't really meant to be here. I was meant to be traveling, but clearly COVID has kind of scuppered those plans. Nevertheless, I've been in the business for almost 30 years in aircraft leasing and aircraft finance with various banks around the world. So just one more thing before we start is that if you, the audience, have any questions that you'd like me to ask Neil, please use the question function of the system. You can see a little icon down on the bottom. On the right-hand side of the actual video screen, you can see a dialog box. So please do ask questions. I can't promise to ask all of the questions, but please do go for it. And if I don't get to your question, I do apologize. So without further ado, let's get into this. Neil, good afternoon. How are you doing?
I'm very good, Michael. How are you?
Very good, thank you. Very good indeed. Thanks very much for joining us. Before we get into the whole area of environmental issues, hybrid aircraft, etc., if you could just give us some outlines as to when did you get into the business and why did you get into aviation?
Well, I mean, aviation's always been a passion since I was a youngster. I had intentions to become an RF fighter pilot, and unfortunately the eyesight got in the way of that one, so that didn't happen. I ended up actually in my first early part of the working career in the IT market, bringing what would have been one of the world's first tablet computers to the market, but that didn't pan out. The dot-com bubble burst, and I found myself suddenly looking at a new changing career. And at that point, I joined Cabot Aviation. So that was really the start of my commercial market, which was getting involved in the remarketing of aircraft. And so that was with Malcolm Holt and Tony Whitty and Mike Skinner. And it really was a fantastic grounding. I learnt an awful lot about the industry from those guys. And obviously met an awful lot of very good friends and who we now consider as family within ISTAT. So spent many years doing that. And then when I came back from having lived in America for 4 years when I was working with Compass in San Francisco, came back to the UK, did some consultancy for a while, but just had this niggling project which had to be done and had been around for a while in the head. So that was the origins for Faradair.
Excellent. And what's kept you in the business? The intellectual challenge or the scope to make money or everything?
It's one of those industries, I think, that once you're in it, you don't leave. If you have a passion for aerospace anyway, why would you leave? It's it's one of those industries that once it's got its hooks in you, you look at other industries and yeah, it's nice and people may enjoy them for whatever reason. But for me, nothing's going to beat this business. I love aerospace. I love being involved in and around it. And I've made some fantastic friendships and work colleagues through this period. So there are people I know I can turn to who I've known for close to 15, 20 odd years now, that if I needed to ask a question, they'd be there to answer it. If there was business to be done, there's certain people who I know I could trust to do business with. So yeah, that's a rare thing. But of course it's grown. I remember when we were ISTAT meetings of sort of 700-800 people, and now we're 3,000-4,000 people. So yeah, why would you leave it?
Oh, yeah, I totally agree. It's been a great industry for me. I've loved it over the last sort of 29, 30 years. As you say, the people make the industry. And ISTAT, as you say, we've got now 5,500 members around the world. It's turned into a huge organization, which has been fantastic. Just picking up on the people, can you give me a couple of names? Obviously, Malcolm Holt, great guy. He's very, very sad he's no longer with us. But stories that go with Malcolm, can you think of a couple that just to tell people about him?
There are many that I couldn't talk to you about for rightly reasons, and I'm sure Malcolm would be happy that I don't. Really, he gave me the chance. He and Tony sort of put their faith and trust in me, and then tried to send me to my death at my first conference, which was an interesting experience in the north of Africa, which you reminded me of earlier, and it's now a memory that I'm trying to get out of my head at the moment. But yeah, it was. It's very interesting because you do get to go to some amazing places, and when you have that faith and trust, and when you're being charged with representing your business and your company, I remember there's an awful lot of trips that I've done where you look back and you think, good grief, you're jumping on this plane to go here, to go there. I mean, it's not uncommon. I think the longest and most bizarre trip I did was we were closing a deal in Mauritius. So I went from San Francisco to London, down to Mauritius, back to London, at which point I got a phone call that the deal we were closing on in Australia with Qantas, the buyer was there, jumped immediately 2 or 3 hours later onto a business class flight with Qantas because the only ticket was left, down to Sydney, closed the deal there, jumped on the plane back to San Francisco, and that all happened in the space of about 72 hours. But that's not unusual for people in this sector. We spend an awful lot of time in the air. We spend a lot of time going from continent to continent, and you just get used to it. But fortunately, I'm not traveling quite so much now, and we're focusing a little bit more on more close to home regional flying now.
Sure. And so after Cabot, you went to Compass Capital, is that correct?
Yeah. So I went to Compass in San Francisco in 2005 and lived there for 4 years. So I was there until 2009. And at the end of that, obviously came back. The only issue with the visa system there is unless you go for a green card, you obviously have a limited time on your H-1B. And so once I'd finished there, we set up a consultancy back in the UK. But again, in the US, it's a fantastic close family as well. We used to host a number of events, including things like Reno during the air races. And of course, all the ISTAT events, which have now just boomed in terms of, we used to have just the ISTAT Americas and then an ISTAT Europe. Now, of course, we have events in Asia, we have Christmas meets, we have all sorts of things. So it really has been incredible to see that growth and change over the last sort of 10, 15 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mentioned earlier, you are obviously an entrepreneur, starting up Faradair, et cetera, with your partners. What other industries have you been involved in?
So, as I said, the working career started in the IT market. And so that was my grounding in understanding the basis of sales and business development and things like that. And then got involved with creating what would have been the world's first tablet computer. It was a partnership with Siemens. We presented that in partnership with Sun Microsystems and Deutsche Telekom and put that at the CeBIT World Trade Fair in 2001. And that was pretty pushing state of the art. I mean, we were sending, and this would be hysterical to anybody who's of a younger generation now, but we were sending email via GPRS, a dial-up type mechanism where you could actually send an email across the hall to demonstrate it. And it was slow and it was clunky. And as one person very unkindly described the device as looking like a child's Etch-a-Sketch. which if anybody's old enough to remember what that is, you have a rough idea. It's like a rounded rectangle toy thing with twiddly dials to draw pictures on. But VCs and people who were backing at the time said, no, this is more of a child's toy. It's never going to take off. Laptops are here for the business generation. We'll not see tablets become anything big or successful. Yeah, that panned out to about 1 billion units later, and a near miss. So that was basically time to rethink the career, because that was around the time of the dot-com bubble burst. And so now I've experienced 2 of those, because having been through that and then being in San Francisco during the 2008 crash and seeing what was happening in the US, it gives you an idea of what you need to be doing in some of these times to sort of come through that and come out the other side.
Yeah, I was going to ask about management in these sort of situations in troubling times. How do you keep teams together? How do you keep people motivated? What's your management style?
Good question. I mean, I think I learned a number of things with the different guys that I've worked with in the past. And I think I have to say the guys at Compass were brilliant at motivating you from a financial perspective and making sure you're vested into the things that you do. Obviously, the team spirit type of environment, Tony and Malcolm, the guys at Cabot, we used to have what we'd call a good crack. You do your business, you build your networks, you'd make sure that you're doing all that you need to be doing from a working perspective, but at the same time, you're there to network, you're there to make acquaintances and get to know people well. And I think that was a key skill that I learnt at many of the events, things like ISTAT, because you could relax with people. So rather than just sitting across the table where you're used to negotiating with them, you actually learn to actually socialize with people and learn things about them. So when you've got a team, you obviously have to be aware of the challenges that they're under, spotting where the weaknesses are in terms of where people may be slightly suffering from the workload or the environment that they're in. There's lots of little things that you can see, but it's never easy. But I think if you've got a good, relaxed sort of family environment in the business that you have, there shouldn't ever be a situation where if somebody is facing a bit of a challenge, they can simply say, you know what? I'm struggling with this a bit. Can you walk me through this? Or what do you think? How should I deal with that? And nobody should ever be afraid of doing that. And equally, I think everybody should be viewed as equal. I mean, with what we're doing at Faradair, we're going to have a very flat hierarchy in the company. We all have a very level field that we work from. And that's for everybody. And it doesn't matter where you come from, what your background is. Your task is basically, are you fit and able to do the job and do the job to your best ability? Then great. But if you're struggling a bit, then put your hand out and say, hey, I need a bit of help with this. So, yeah, it's just about feeling what's going on in the mood with your team.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. It's understanding people. In the end, management is understanding people, what makes them tick, what are their issues, and having time for people. I think that's kind of the way to get on with people and get the best out of people. You mentioned earlier that you had a niggle, you said, I think was the exact word you used when talking about hybrid aircraft. Can you just go into that a little bit more detail as to where did the thought come from? I mean, was it because you drove a Prius or
Yeah, no, I didn't drive a Prius. I probably won't talk about the car that I drove to Reno once, which I probably shouldn't have done. We have a family history here. This is a program, as mentioned in the highlights earlier. My father was involved in the UAV business. So when I was growing up, UAV being unmanned air vehicles, so the big military drones. So growing up and in my early teens, being part of that environment and going to the factory and working with the guys and flight tests and seeing that environment had a real big impact on me. That was something I absolutely loved. And unfortunately, due to the global situation at the time during Gulf War I and economic situation, the company just didn't quite survive. That said, the assets were taken from the company and did very well in America and were taken and won a major trial program effectively with US military. But I made this commitment to Dad, and I've mentioned it on a couple of videos and times, that we would carry on what he was doing. And we will carry on that sort of joined wing technology work and make a big success of it at some point in the future. The fact is, he was about 30 years ahead of the game with what he was doing, probably way too early in the market. But a lot of that has now come forward. We're seeing a lot of the vision, a lot of the understanding of the opportunities for unmanned air vehicles and drones and things like that. Just recently, we had a flight for medical supplies going from mainland England across to the Isle of Wight, and a lot of people were sort of super excited. But I remember being down, the company was down at Thorney Island, just near Portsmouth there, and flying big military drones across the Solent on many occasions. So it's great to see that migration now from the military side into the civilian side. And so part of that commitment was we were going to do something. So having seen the regional market and having seen some of the challenges that a lot of the regional carriers had with the assets that exist, and looking at the challenges in the market itself. So, for example, the cost of operations, if you are basically operating a turboprop service, as has been done on many routes, and they just still can't make that work, then how do we solve that problem? How do we make that more economically viable? We have the noise issue, becoming ever more prevalent now, especially after COVID and during COVID, is the fact that if you announce anything air-based anywhere near anybody's homes, you will get complaints about it straight away before they've even understood the what, the how, the where, or the when. So that needs to be solved. And then we're talking about emissions, sustainability. We're seeing a shift, and really the development of technologies coincided with this thinking. So I was starting to see what was happening with electric motors, starting to see what was happening with new materials, graphene, carbon composites, all that sort of thing, where you just think, hang on a minute, have we now got the opportunity where we can take some of these technologies, merge them with the existing technologies, and then start looking to the future? Can we come up with a design of aircraft that does something different to what we do now? Can we open up markets that don't exist at the moment? Because, I mean, if you look at the US, for example, 5,000 odd airfields, of which roughly about 500 have any scheduled services. That's an awful lot of air park real estate that we could be using. So all of that started coming together. So we looked at the problems, looked at what we needed to solve, and then with the join wing technology ideas from the past, we think, let's start morphing that now into something that might serve that market, and then serve a range of other markets as well. Because everybody knows if you build a one-trick pony aircraft, then you're going to go bankrupt and go bust. If you've got something that can serve several markets across different areas, then you've got something that's going to weather many storms and provide a longevity, as proven by many of the utility aircraft still in existence today.
Excellent. So we kind of get into the weeds now a bit on environmental issues, etc. Is the driver? I think the driver of this aircraft seems to be, or hybrid aircraft, seems to be a number of things. It's not just environmental. It seems to be operational costs. It seems to be noise. It seems to be a whole bunch of other things. Is that right? I mean, clearly, your comments earlier would drive or tend us to believe that. But emissions seems to be the thing at the moment, and quite rightly. I mean, we as an industry need to do our bit to make sure we do reduce emissions. Do you think we're doing enough at this stage?
Yes and no. I mean, as I said, I sat at the World Travel Market last year, and I sat down with somebody who, on a panel, who was an avid anti-aviationist, shall we say. Dirty, filthy beasts. End of the world is nigh type stuff. And by the end of it, he'd actually turned around, and somebody in the audience said, that's quite interesting. That could be something that could be good for the industry and the market. And he had never said that about aviation. I just can't for the life of me remember his name right now. Jeremy somebody, but whatever it was a clear recognition that there is capability to do things differently. Now, what I'd said at the time was, if you look at where commercial aviation was in the 1970s, and you look at the noise footprint, if you look at the soot that was coming out the back of the engines, I mean, you could see the trails from miles away. And you look at the advancement over the last sort of 20 years, 30 years even, in cleaner burning engines, more efficient aircraft going from 4 engines to 2 engines. That is huge improvement, but of course the demand is going up as well. So whilst the improvements are being made and the industry is doing fantastic work to make that happen, equally the demand is going up. So you're sort of almost maintaining a status quo of where you're at. But there's going to be even more requirement to do more. A lot of that's going to be technology based. But there are short gains that we can do now. I mean, for example, I remember when Wheel Tug were presenting at an ISTAT event in, I think it was 2005, 2006, somewhere around that time, talking about electric taxiing. And there are definitely short field gains that we could do right now. For example, if you come within 2 miles of any major international hub airport in the world, you can probably smell it before you see it. The smell of kerosene is in the air. There's a lot that we can do with existing technology now today to clean up that bit alone straight away. The fact that we could be looking at the ideas of holding pens. Most of the big airports, you see aircraft lined up sitting on the taxiways in huge, great queues anyhow. So why not now convert this into a holding pen idea where electric tugs, a lot more electric vehicles on the airport itself, enable us to minimize the amount of fuel burn time we have on the ground. That's just a real quick fix we could go for right now. From a longer term perspective, looking at what the green fuel sustainable option may be for commercial jets. We know that battery tech just isn't there right now to do the big jets, but we could be looking at potential fuel cell. We certainly have got the short-term opportunity with SAFs, sustainable aviation fuels. So if we can now start bringing more of that in, but then of course you've got to be looking at how do you produce SAFs? Are you making sure that you're doing it in a environmentally neutral way that isn't going to impact food stocks, etc.? These are all things that it's not just about the one single item. It's about understanding the full infrastructure that goes in behind that. So, for example, if you do make hydrogen for fuel cells, are you making it as green hydrogen, or is it what we would call black hydrogen, where it's being actually created via fossil fuel processes? So a lot of that has yet to develop, but there are some shorter term games we can do. And from our perspective, we saw a natural opportunity straight away where we could go after some of those points just by bringing in electric motor technology for things like takeoff, like taxiing on the ground. That's a no-brainer. The fact that you have instantaneous torque that you can use to get the aircraft moving and off into the air whilst reducing the amount that you have on the actual turbine itself, yeah, that's an easy fix right now.
That's excellent. I think the industry is looking at I think contributes about 2% of global emissions at the moment. And I think the targets are to reduce our 2005, our being the aviation sector's 2005 emissions by 50% by 2050. I suppose the question is that aggressive enough, or should the industry itself be asking to do more than that at this stage?
Again, a lot of it comes down to the technology itself of what's available. It's one thing to set targets and times. We, in our program, unfortunately, we have been hindered most by financing, the ability to deliver. Had we been given the funding that we'd requested back in 2015, the aircraft would be sitting on the ramp today. That's frustrating because that's just a funding problem. But in terms of the actual technologies, if we're saying we've got to be X by Y, that's great, so long as you've looked at the entire infrastructure that goes around it, and we've got to have that already several years beforehand, and we've got to have tested it, we've got to certify it, we've got to approve it. So whilst it's great to have the objectives to aim for, we've really got to make sure we do this in a staggered process that is not only protecting the safety record of the aviation market, which is absolutely imperative, but also doing it in a way where we don't do things that might have some really undesired consequences. It's something that, especially with the new eVTOL market, is going to be very important, because in certain people's desires to get out there and be first, if they haven't dealt with some of the core issues like noise, they will be setting a bad impression for those coming after and behind them that actually may be better with noise. So things like that have to be very carefully managed. In terms of our position versus other industries, I think it's quite right and proper that we should be showcasing what the industry is doing to improve its green credentials, which is significantly more than many other industries. I mean, if you look at things like the cargo shipping markets and the cruise liner markets and things, I mean, it's not just about the emissions coming out the stacks. It's what goes on of wastewater products and things like that. There is an awful lot that other industries can be doing to even come close to matching what aviation is doing right now. So I think we can be very proud of what we're doing. Can we do more? Absolutely. What's one of the key criteria for that? Spending. It's how much are we going to invest in this? And if you, as a government or a position, put forward, oh, well, we're going to invest 5 million in this or 10 million, great. Don't expect to lead the world at that point. You've got to be making big swings for the fences. We're talking hundreds and hundreds of millions, even into the billions. if we're going to hit the speed and the requirement that we need to meet that sort of 2050 environment, we have got to be going really big with the spend on this, because the more that we spend at it, the more people we can throw at this, the more resources, the more things that we can try. Some are going to fail. You've got to accept that. You've got to accept that a lot of these things are going to have risk, but we can do it at a scale and speed that the funding permits. If we throttle that, if we try and hinder that by making it too bureaucratic or restricting to the amount of people who can do it, we're not going to get anywhere close to those targets. So I think the upside is we're doing very well as an industry. Can we do more? Of course. Are we doing a lot more than other industries? Absolutely. And I think we should be proud of that.
Yeah, I think the aviation industry takes the whole emissions, environmental issues. It does take it seriously, and just from a cost base, aircraft are that much more efficient, and if they are that much more efficient, that should flow through to the bottom line as well, which is obviously important for airlines moving forward. You've obviously touched on it. One of my questions was going to be, what should governments be doing? I don't specifically mean the UK government. I mean just generally governments. What should they be doing? Is it just finance? Obviously, regulatory issues. What else should they be doing to support this business moving forward?
One of the key things is, let's get the story straight. Let's get everybody talking from a unified page. If you have governments going off in different angles and different ideas and directions, it's going to do nothing but slow the whole process down, because ultimately you're going to have to bring all of those ideas and directions together and say, okay, well, which one's best out of this? Whereas if we get everybody agreed to a sort of common agenda, if we get everybody looking at exactly what it is we need to do, then each of the governments can then take a respective look at their own particular domestic market in terms of what they're good at, funding, what would be a good fit for them, because where one country may be good at aerospace innovation, airframes, building of products, etc. Another country may be better at fuels, or it may be better at the environment that we operate in, or technologies that go in the supply chain that help make airports cleaner and greener, and clean energy requirements for the ground bases and things like that. There's horses for courses across all countries, but I think we need to start getting a very common agenda as to what we're going to be doing from a government level globally.
Yeah, okay. I suppose also getting governments involved brings with a lot of bureaucracy, which can slow things down. So private finance, etc., is probably more nimble than getting governments involved on the financial side. Anyway, from the private financial side, are you seeing a lot of interest in this space from PE, or not very much at this stage?
From post-COVID, absolutely. I mean, what we're seeing is a situation where, for the first time in generations, people who've lived around Heathrow, Chicago, Atlanta, New York, there are people living within close strike of these airports that have experienced something that they've never experienced before, which is quiet, clean skies, no noise, no traffic outside their doors. That's had a major impact. And of course, now with global push and a lot of governments wanting to go toward net zero emissions and cleaner agenda, then the VCs and the private equity markets are now looking at this and going, okay, there's opportunity here. And let's not kid ourselves. The VCs are in this to make money, and investors are in this to make money. So if there is a genuine push by all parties that we need to go down this path, then of course there's going to be great opportunities for those prepared to invest in things like ESG, sustainable investments that basically look after the environment. This is really going to start growing, and I think we're already starting to see that shift in investment opportunity. We're starting to see companies starting to invest in sustainable transport solutions, and that can only be a good thing. In terms of how do the dynamics work, again, you're right. There is a change in corporate government structure here. Traditionally, there's a way that we do things which is very bureaucratic. We must do things to this agenda, to this written document with this amount of study and this research paper and yada, yada, yada. The world has changed. I mean, the business environment has changed. You're looking at the world of Elon Musk. You're looking at the world of Jeff Bezos. You're looking at how things have suddenly come about that have completely changed the incumbents' attitude of what they need to be doing differently. Let's face it, Elon is now flying NASA astronauts. up into space. How cool is that? I mean, in a time when he was first told, don't be ridiculous, this is not an area that you need to be playing in. Likewise, the automotive. And I think that more nimble, innovative, let's not be afraid to fail, let's not be afraid to throw a few things out there, but let's try and limit how much we're spending in doing that. Let's try and make sure that we're being sensible about our spend. And let's get out there. Let's start backing things. And yeah, we don't need to necessarily do a 4-year white paper on how this is going to affect us. Let's just look at the problem, let the innovators come up with the solutions, and they come to you then and say, okay, you have this problem. This is the solution that we've created for it. This is the funding we require to give our trials and start prototyping. So there is going to be a shift in culture from the government perspective. There's going to be a shift, I believe, in the VC and the investment market in making sure that portfolios have got a green element to it. And I think if you look at the airlines and the structuring of business models going forward, especially post-COVID, we're looking at significant changes as well. So there's a lot of change ahead.
Excellent. Okay. Now, just to change tack, I'd like to sort of dive down into the reads a little bit more. Hybrid aircraft. Can we just all get on the same page here? Because I've got a view of what hybrid is. My wife does drive a Prius, to be honest. I do drive it occasionally, but I'm more of a motorbike man myself. Nevertheless, a hybrid aircraft. What is a hybrid aircraft?
Hybrid aircraft, let's be fair here. A hybrid could be a number of different things. Basically, a hybrid is a combination of technologies. So how you combine those technologies is very much down to you and the reasoning for it. With us, with our aircraft, we basically looked at what's called more of a parallel hybrid. We wanted to use an existing, proven, type-certified propulsion system, green that up as much as possible. So if we can use biofuel or sustainable aviation fuel in a proven turbine, great. By then implementing or supplementing with an electric motor that can take on some of the role and responsibility early in the flight process, i.e. takeoff, and then go into a recharge mode where the turbine is predominant and the electric is in supplementary, that seemed to be an easy, logical fit to us. Making sure that your landing gear is electrically powered as well, so you can taxi around on the ground, that was a no-brainer as well. But of course, then you've got serious hybrids. And if you see the opportunity as having a generator and then having electric distributed propulsion, for example, as one model, then that is a perfectly viable solution as well. So there will be different courses for different aircraft types. With our aircraft type, with the high lift profile, with the big lift of the triple box wing, we knew that we wanted more of a singular propulsion system, and we wanted to have something that we could put into the market relatively quickly. It's relatively easy for the regulators to get their head around. But that said, it's still a new technology. It's a new way of looking at it. We have to be able to convince the regulators that we're looking for single stick operation, yet they may look at it and go, well, but in reality, you have two propulsion units there, even though they're working together. And they are open to that. So there is new thinking from the regulators that say, okay, we understand this is a single propulsion system that can be operated together, split, or predominance one way or the other. And they are working on these regulations right now and coming to an environment where we can go and prove and demonstrate that. And why is that important? It's important because if you're stuck into the multi-engine discipline environment where you have to have a multi-engine licensed pilot, you have to have the insurance requirements for multi-engine, you have to have all the operational requirements for multi-engine, you're not saving some of those costs that we're looking to save in that cost of operations equation. So we have got to get down to single pilot flying capability. We have to go into that single propulsion system, but that has the benefits of multi-engine, i.e. it has the redundancy, has the safety. So if for whatever reason you had a fuel stoppage or something on the main turbine, you have got that safety feature of the electric propulsion system for a period of time. That period of time is maybe 20 minutes today. In 3 years' time, that may be 45 minutes. Technology and batteries are going to improve significantly, which means that that number is just going to get better. But the fact that you have that backup capability, that means that you can basically now have the opportunity to put your aircraft down safely and obviously protect everybody on board. So there's a number of safety benefits. There's a lot of cost-saving benefits. But what the exact configuration is will very much depend on your airframe and what is best suited for that airframe.
And the technology, as you described it, how more efficient is an aircraft like yours, like the Beha, potentially, compared to a similar aircraft, similar size, which is just your normal combustion engine? What sort of saving are you talking about?
Well, I mean, at the moment we're looking at anywhere between 20 to 30% fuel burn saving in just the fuel burn alone in terms of how the aircraft's going to operate. But I think more than that, it's also you're reducing the load life on the core asset, so the turbine isn't going to have to work as hard. So your maintenance costs are going to be reducing. You're looking at situations where the actual technology itself is already being proven in the market. We've seen several test flights of some of the electrically converted aircraft. And so when you combine that all together, we can now start bringing technologies in, demonstrating them, proving them in the marketplace, showing that they work. And in terms of the actual final cost savings, hopefully an awful lot more than we're sort of predicting at the moment, where we're saying about $600 per hour operating cost. If the technology keeps improving the way it is at the moment, we're hoping to reduce that even more. So that's where you start to make some really significant dent into the cost of operations.
Okay, you're right. I mean, technology, the battery life is critical, and the efficiency of the engines. I was chatting to one of my neighbours who's just bought a Tesla, and he was pretty annoyed because I think just after he bought it, Tesla came out with a super enhanced version of the battery, which means it can go for another however many miles, another 100 odd miles, etc. So clearly the technology is increasing, is rapidly changing to make sure that it is more efficient. I suppose one of the issues, chatting to my lovely mother about this, and I said, look, hybrid aircraft, it's a thing of the future. She's skeptical. And I've got to think that she is probably reflective of a number of people out there. They say, excuse me, you want to get into a hybrid aircraft, hybrid on the ground, Prius, whatever, fine, I understand that. You want me to get in an aircraft, which is a hybrid, I'm not so sure. How is that going to be? How do you convince people? I mean, I suppose it's just through a fraction of time, proving it, getting out there and doing it.
That's the key thing. But again, this was a key reason why when we first set up, we decided to go down the hybrid path first, followed by the all-electric. We have known there's been a number of incidents with battery technology, both on land and in the air, that are proving that we have some issues there. There are things like thermal management of batteries is quite a key issue. So if you had all of your eggs in that basket initially, then there is the chance that you may have a problem. And of course, if you're at 10,000 feet, that's very different to if you're on the side of a road where you can park and step out of your vehicle. So having a traditional propulsion system combining with this and making that first step, proving to people what is capable, proving that you can make aircraft quieter, that you can make them more efficient. And it's the seeing is believing. Once people start seeing this technology being deployed and put into the market, they start accepting very, very quickly. And then you start bringing in the further technology. So if you then start migrating to all electric, because again, the battery architecture has changed, it has got to a point where we're driving nails into solid state batteries and they're not reacting in any way, shape or form and things like that, people will get confident with it. At the end of the day, you can go back to people's views and opinions of the Wright brothers when they were first thinking of flying. And the quotes are all out there. There will always be people who say it can never happen, it's nonsense, it's moonshine, it's con, it's this, that, and everything else. You have to prove what you're doing to a certain degree. Fortunately, with new technologies like computer modeling, the requirement, we don't have to necessarily do the flight testing programs that we did in the past to prove a principle. So now we can go after certain things like we did with our wing configuration. When we first went to Cranfield, you look at them, you say, this is what we've come up with. What do you think? Are we completely barking mad? And you expect them to look at you and go, yeah, I'm kind of skeptical about that, and I think you are mad. Ben Evans, our aerodynamicist, he had the same thing. But once you start working through the numbers, once you start looking at this thing going, wow, this thing actually works. I see now why you're doing this. And you then evolve from that. You can do the same thing with the public. But it comes back to the point I made earlier. You can also do it very, very wrong. We have things like the Pan Am building incident in 77 with helicopters in cities. If you get it wrong, it can have a massive knock-on for the industry going forward. So we've got to make sure we get it right. We've got to make sure that we're all singing off the same hymn sheet in terms of regulations, which means the regulators have really now got to start sitting down together and saying, what are we prepared to accept? What are we not prepared to accept? What are we going to work on? Where's the focus? And that's got to start happening now, because Anybody can make a flying bathtub and put quadcopter motors on it, etc. But the problem is, if we're not operating to the same standards, something that may go off and cause a major problem, crash, have an issue, is then going to have a knock-on effect to the rest of the business. So if we can get that environment set early, and if we can all start working to a sensible, layered, laddered process as we go forward, the public will come. Because at the end of the day, the public want benefit. They want not to be disturbed. They want the right and capability to have convenient, low-cost air travel regionally. They don't want to be sat in congested traffic jams anymore, and they certainly don't want to be paying the types of fares that they're paying on overcrowded rail networks. So it's a no-brainer that this market has opportunity. Anybody can see that, and just making sure we develop it in a sensible way will ensure that that is going to have longevity over many, many years.
Okay, it all makes sense. And just coming back to the regulators, I've got a questions come in from Eric van der Berg. Do you see the regulators handle the hybrid propulsion with respect to safety, engine on performance? If I can just change that slightly and say, do you see the regulators actually working together across, the EASA, the UK, the FAA, looking at this seriously? Have they got a plan, or is this again just going to get a bit bureaucratic?
They are and they aren't. I know, for example, EASA are pushing hard on this. They're doing really well. We were in contact with some of the guys not so long ago, and there is a real push on that. We've seen the Pipistrel electric trainer aircraft. That's now been certified, which is fantastic. So we're starting to see them getting their heads around the architectures that are going to be required. But then we've got to make sure that we're doing that from a tied-up process. We've also got to make sure that we're not doing it from a vested interest process. So if somebody comes bulldozing in with a huge ton of money and saying, we need you to go in this direction, it could be a disaster. We need to make sure that this is a very broad approach, that the regulators are taking in as wide an audience as possible, because it may be that some of the smaller guys have actually worked out something that some of the larger guys haven't worked out yet. And I think that if we can get that communication going across some of the regulators from Australia, from the US, from the UK, the Chinese, it's going to be difficult. But I think that whilst we've got the products being made right now and there's focus on what we can put into the market, it's now upon the regulators for them to be now starting to come together almost in their own conferences to say, right, this is what we've come up with. This is what we've come up with. This is what we've come up with. And for them now to start pulling the alignment. We can help. We can help guide them in that. We can, as an industry, we can sort of give our impression as to where we think they need to be going. But they have to be open to the potential of that's not how we did it in the past. They're starting to do it. Things like Part 23 CS20, great examples of how you can certify an airplane that doesn't have to be certified to the same standard of a G650 or a 747. If it's not pressurized, if it's only going 2-hour hop flights, that's a different certification process. And so we're seeing improvements in that. But of course, we're also seeing the issues of when the regulators maybe miss something or there is a problem in the market, it causes an awful lot of delay going down. So I think getting them involved in this process early, we intend to bring the regulator into the development of the aircraft. So as we get into the structural engineering of the BR, the regulator is going to be part of that so that they can see what we're doing, how we're proposing it. And if there's anything that they're not particularly comfortable about, now is the time to speak. We don't want them suddenly putting their hand up once the aircraft's on the ramp and saying, I don't understand that and I don't like that, because we then have to go and spend millions trying to fix that. So we'd far rather them come in early, be part of the process, and for them to be comfortable about what we're doing so that by the time something arrives on the ramp, they go, great, yeah, we're good to go. Let's see how it goes.
Makes a lot of sense. Okay, so quick, obvious question for you guys is, why did you concentrate on the smaller market, the regional market, as opposed to thinking bigger, if you will, in terms of 70-seater, 90-seater, whatever? Why go for that size first?
Put it this way, I think you would be astonishingly arrogant if you thought you could come in as a startup and tell the commercial airline OEMs how to build one of their aircraft better and quicker than they can. You wouldn't last long doing that. It's just not sensible. What is sensible is looking at things from a smaller scale, testing it, proving it. We're seeing companies like Magnix, for example. They've proven with their electric motors that they've put them on a Beaver Cub, I think it was, the Harbour Air aircraft, and then you've got the Cessna Caravan. These are all proving technologies and proving capabilities. So what you're seeing is scaling up in size, and we're doing the same thing. We're saying if we do want to do passenger carrying, if we do want to improve regional air mobility, well, then there's a number of things that we know that we've got to abide by and we've got to target. Revenue passenger kilometers are key. So you could go too small. If you're talking about an asset that's got 4 or 5 seats, it might be suitable for the wealthy, but you're not going to be getting that mass appeal that you need of getting regional flights. So, for example, when British Midland were flying ERJ 145 jets out of Heathrow with an average of 18 passengers on board to do a flight to Aberdeen, that's a number of people that could be in an aircraft like ours going from an airfield like, say, North Holt, 5 miles to the north of Heathrow, doing the same flight, but an awful lot more economically sound, environmentally sound, and at a scale that we can produce and we know we can produce. The requirements for a heavy aircraft, a large commercial aircraft, with the technologies that exist today, is almost undoable at the moment. There are some options, but is it going to be enough to be more viable and more attractive than the existing asset that's available? That's the challenge. You can do that on a smaller scale. The technology needs to improve significantly in order for us to do it on a much larger scale.
Okay, makes sense. So how long? When do you think the first passenger flight of a hybrid aircraft is actually going to take place? Is it 2025 or is it 2030 or 35? When? It
should have been today. We should have been flying already. That's what's frustrating, is if people had listened to the view that we put forward back in 2015, the aircraft would be on the ramp today. We'd have the world's leading hybrid electric aircraft starting to take to the air. That is frustrating because there is no technological reason why that couldn't have happened. It's purely funding. We are seeing some startups in the marketplace get huge funding. You've seen the rounds that Lilium have had. You see the likes of Joby Aviation. They've all had huge funding rounds. And I think that what you're going to see is an increase in the funding of sustainable transport solutions. And that is going to be the thing that speeds everything up. And I mean that by the sense of the amount of engineers you can take on, the amount of development you can do in a much shorter time because you've got more use of equipment, you can get more equipment to solve problems faster. All of this comes down to investment. And I think what we're also going to see is a greater interest from the airlines from a different model. So we had a very large airline come to us just recently and say, yep, game plan for the next 2 years, ripped up, thrown out the window. We're now putting out fires. We're deciding how we're going to restructure our airline. That's probably going to mean a reduction in international hubs. That means we're going to have a probably increased requirement for regional connectivity. But we've also got to be cleaner and greener and more sustainable. So we're kind of coming to your door fairly soon to say that this is the type of thing that we need to be talking about. And I think that through any challenges now for the future, if governments turn to the airlines and turn to the industry and say, that's fine, we can help. We can give you the funding that supports, but you've got to prove to us what the green credentials are behind this. The UK government's just been doing that recently, which is great. But there's got to be this across the whole marketplace. And I think from our perspective, subject to funding, we intend to have the aircraft in the sky by the end of 23, beginning of 24. 2 years worth of certification flying. We hope to be in scheduled service by end of 2026, all going well. That's the target. That will be a fantastic opportunity, not only for us, but also across several markets, because with what we're doing, it's not just a passenger aircraft. It's a quick change combi, so you can be doing freight and cargo. So the opportunity to fly at nighttime with an aircraft which is genuinely quiet. If you've got open props, there's no way you can fly genuinely quiet at night. You just can't. So the fact that the design of our aircraft enables that quiet flight capability means that we can offer operators the ability to manage their flows in peaks and troughs. They can bring in revenue, as they've done in COVID. You've seen them putting boxes and freight in their cabins because they've had to. But if you're starting to look at a lower regional level, the fact that they can disperse different types of roles and capabilities for their aircraft, they can put in a VIP interior, so they could do corporate shuttles. They can run a commuter shuttle service in the morning. They can run freight at night. All of these things mean that you get much more bang for your buck out of your asset, and you've got to be working the asset much harder. So we're quite proud of our flying van type mentality. It's a case of You can dress it, fill it, use it how you like. We provide you with the asset that will enable you to go and generate the most revenue and income opportunity.
Excellent. So it's great designing an aircraft that looks great, etc. But if you can't sell it, it's been a waste of time. What reaction are you getting from the airlines? You just mentioned the airlines. What reaction are you getting from the market?
Changing reaction is the best way to put it right now. The world's lens as it was 6 months ago is not the lens that we're looking through now. The fact that people have now finally woken up to the opportunity of sustainable transport, and air transport in particular, it is a great opportunity to be looking at new business models. And so there has been a big uptake in interest, I'm delighted to say. The fact that we are now based at our Duxford airfield with two fantastic partners, with the Imperial War Museum and a college like Gonville and Keys, with huge history, and as part of the Cambridge Innovation Corridor there, it just enables people to have the confidence that we're now starting to pull together a program that makes sense, a program that's actually going to deliver, an aircraft that's actually going to fly. And these are the things that once the airlines start seeing this, once they then start seeing the true facts and figures, so once we've frozen the design from the end of the design optimization, we've got really into the structural engineering of it, and we know exactly what the aircraft's going to do, we'll start sharing this information and start working with some of the regional airlines to say, look, let's start looking at some of your route analysis. Let's start seeing where the aircraft could start saving you money. Once we start getting into that with the airlines, they will then be far more confident about looking to place orders and change models that aircraft like ours can then start feeding into hubs that go into larger aircraft and then off to further afield. So that's definitely the path that we have to take.
So COVID in some ways has been beneficial to your whole rationale with the airlines, which is quite interesting. I mean, in a time when COVID is absolutely decimating the airline industry, it's quite interesting that your product is actually, in a sense, benefiting from COVID.
Yeah, and let's not kid ourselves or say anything like this aircraft is going to be the solution to global air transport demand. It isn't. This aircraft is specifically designed for doing the local environment work. It's the smaller regional flights. We're not proposing that you would make a three-wing version of the aircraft and fly it across the Atlantic, because frankly, that wouldn't make any sense. This aircraft is designed for short field environment. We'll take off and land in less than 300 meters. But it's more than that. It's been specifically designed to do certain roles very well. So, for example, if somebody said, well, I could do the same thing with a single wing. Yeah, but you wouldn't fit the single wing in the hangar of the side of the new QE class of aircraft carrier that the UK has, or ships like the America class for the amphibious assault ships for the US. Aircraft that can do longer range, quieter, more cost efficiently than helicopter flight, being able to operate from ships like that is just one of the types of roles that we're looking at with this aircraft, in addition to things like border patrol, drug interdiction work, all sorts of fisheries patrol, offshore oil pipe, wind farm inspections, things like this. These are all capabilities where, from our perspective, we see opportunity to do things further, faster, with heavier payload, with greater safety potential for the aircraft where helicopters are currently being used, with big cost saving, and then that feeds into the bigger network. So as the technologies improve, we're going to see this type of technology starting to migrate into the bigger aircraft. And so that at some point, hopefully, I mean, people will say, well, what's it going to be like in 2050? Some of us won't be alive in 2050. You can only sort of best guess with the technology development curve that you can see. And I think that wouldn't it be great if we have got truly net zero transportation? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, no matter what people think, we have got to protect this planet. The number of people on this planet is increasing year on year, and there is a finite amount of resources. So if the resources are finite and we've all got to live on this planet and not destroy it, we've got to be doing things better. We've got to be doing things cleaner, more efficiently, and also opening up the opportunity to everybody. How is it that if I want to go from Cambridge to Swansea, for example, I have to go via land? There isn't an airbridge regional flight for that. We have to be able to do that in other countries. So areas where it takes a truck 4 days to get from one part of Africa to another in a country, when our aircraft should be doing that role cost effectively for them. Likewise, India, China, inter-island operations. All of these opportunities where if we can make this flight model affordable and capable, where businesses can make money operating it and people get the greater upside at the other side of it, what's not to like about this? It really is a no-brainer.
Fascinating. I think you and I have been very fortunate with this aviation business. It's been a fantastic business to be part of, and I've thoroughly enjoyed certainly my 29, 30 years, and clearly you have as well. Any advice? We have ISTAT students, ISTAT University students, who log into these chats. Any advice for them? Where should they be focusing? What should they be looking at?
It's tricky. I was having this conversation the other day, and if you remember the ISTAT events that we were a part of sort of 10, 15 years ago, they're very different to now. The mindsets have changed now. And I'll give you an example. I gave a lecture, a talk as part of a panel at a Tortoise Media event in London, predominantly millennials in the room. And the question I posed to them is, and this just wouldn't even cross my mind when I was younger, is the fact that for me, seeing Concorde taking off and seeing that 6-foot blue flame coming out the back of it as it was racing off and killing the afterburners and racing across the Atlantic, that was incredible. Seeing the SR-71 come and do a bubble burst run at Mildenhall Air Display where it just almost hits the sound barrier and then backs off. Phenomenal with that great big flame out the back. But that's not how the new generation's thinking. So I asked this group in the room, I said, if you could go today from London to New York in 3 hours, but burning the existing fuel structure and not really improving carbon footprint, or you could go slower than you could go today, but do it completely net zero with no climate impact whatsoever, which one would you pick? 95% of the room went with the clean solution. So what we're seeing here is generational shift. We're seeing difference in attitudes. We're seeing different capabilities in terms of their understanding of what we should be doing. And that's quite encouraging because it means that they're coming at things with a fresh perspective. So whilst a lot of the youngsters are coming into the industry thinking, okay, shiny, pointy, fast, great, clean, green, sustainable, even better. Well, what solutions have you got for that? What are we going to be doing to support that? What are we going to be doing to make sure that we have got a diverse and open nature? We've got to make sure that the pale and stale is an image of the past, and we've got to now start be looking at a fresher look at this. But equally, those who've been in the industry a long time have got a lot of experience that they can basically reach out, put their arms around a lot of these folks and say, you know what? This is how we've done things in the past. This is why we did things. Things are changing. What do you feel about that? What do you think about that? What's your ideas on it? And they will not only learn from us, but we will also learn from them. We've got to start thinking slightly differently as well, because ultimately they're the customers. And I think that's really imperative for the airlines at the moment, where everybody's running around at the moment saying what we should be doing. We need to be asking. Honeywell just did a really interesting survey on passengers and their use and everything else. We need to start focusing on who the customers are. What do the customers want? What is their requirement, rather than us potentially coming into the industry and saying, this is what we've produced and this is what you can have. Does it solve the requirement of the end user? That's the thing we've really got to start getting our head around now. And if the end users want clean green, if they want slower, if they want lower cost tickets, or if they want higher cost tickets for being prepared to offset the cost of developing some of this stuff, let's find out. Let's get out there, start putting some of this kit out and see how they respond.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, I was very fortunate. Number of years ago, obviously, I did get to travel in Concorde. You mentioned it, and it was fantastic. But these days, that's just not the thing. It is not. It's clean, and quite rightly, it is clean and has to be efficient from an economic perspective as well. Neil, we're almost out of time. I just want to say thank you very much for giving, I think, just a small snippet of an insight into this fascinating, diverse, but also just really complicated world of hybrid aircraft, which I think is just going to be more and more part of our infrastructure moving forward. So I just want to say thank you very much indeed for your time today. Sorry to people, I didn't get to ask too many questions, but there you go. If I can just say thank you to the ISTAT team who put this work together and pulled together this high quality production. Thank you very much to all you guys, really appreciate it. The next ISTAT chat will be our first ISTAT cooking chat. with which will be on the 3rd of August, I understand, at 5 o'clock Dublin time, which is noon in New York, midnight in Singapore, if you guys are really up for that. Which will feature Christine Ravelli, Vice President, Group Treasurer of Finnair, together with Bryson. I understand Christine is actually a very recognised test kitchen cook, so that should be a little bit more entertaining. And the next ISTAT Learning Lab is entitled Restructurings in a COVID-19 Environment, which is on the 11th of August, 10 o'clock New York, 3 o'clock Dublin. And that's going to be given by my very good friend Dean Gerber, who's General Counsel of Oryx. So please do check into the ISTAT website. It just remains for me to say thanks again to Neil. Thank you. Really appreciate your time. And wherever you are in the world, please be safe and have a good day. Thanks very much indeed. Bye-bye.